Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Benjamin Quinn, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I'm so excited to welcome you to tonight's event with Anaïs Duplan, discussing his book, Blackspace, on the Poetics of an Afrofuture, in conversation with Hanif Abdurraqib. Tonight's event is part of our ongoing virtual event series. As we remain digital for the time being, we're so excited to continue the work of bringing authors and their writing to our community during these difficult times. Especially now, it is through the support of authors and our beloved community that we are able to make events like this happen. So thank you so much for continuing to show up. For tonight's event, we will conclude with some time for your questions. If you'd like to ask the speaker something, locate the Q&A button wherever it may live on your Zoom display, where you can submit all your questions. We'll get through as many as time allows. If you go to the chat section of this presentation, I will shortly be posting a link to our website where you can purchase your copy of Blackspace. If you already have a copy of the book or would like to contribute to this series and our store in a different way, I will also be posting in the chat a link to our website's donation button. We greatly appreciate any and all support you were able to extend to us at this time. And lastly, as you may know if you've participated in large virtual gatherings lately, technical issues might come up. We do apologize in advance for that. If any technical glitches do occur, we will do our best to resolve them as quickly as possible. And now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. Anaïs Duplan is a poet, artist, curator, and the founder of the Center for Afrofuturist Studies, an artist residency program for artists of color based in Iowa City. He is the author of the poetry collections Take the Stallion and Mount Carmel and the Blood of Parnassus, and is the creator of several multimedia exhibitions, brilliant blends of video and anecdote, which have been showcased in such venues as the 13th Baltic Triennial in Lithuania and the Institute of Contemporary Art in LA. Hanif Abdurraqib is an acclaimed poet and cultural critic whose work has appeared in the New York Times, MTV News, and other outlets. He is the author of several books, including the celebrated poetry collections The Crown Ain't Worth Much and A Fortune for Your Disaster, as well as two best-selling books of music and cultural criticism, the absolutely wonderful They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us and Go Ahead in the Rain, Notes to a Tribe Called Quest. Tonight, these two brilliant writers will be discussing An's latest book, Blackspace, on the Poetics of an Afrofuture. Across An's multifaceted, multiversal work, the complex contextual politics of being are probed by a voice, singular yet multiple, that is at times direct, at times iridescent, at times weighed down by the burden of the opaque self, yet also vibrant with the possibility of a liberated future. In Blackspace, Duplan mines the work of several luminaries of the Black avant-garde, including actress Juliana Huxtable and Nathaniel Mackey, just to name a few, to not only define an elusive aesthetics of survival, but to conjure a future for the self. I want to end with an observation from An's conversation partner this evening, who said in a review of this book that, quote, "It would be a gift to read the brilliance of Blackspace in any season, but it feels especially thrilling now." During a season that offers us very little resembling grace, it is an absolute honor and privilege to have these two amazing artists with us tonight. Without further ado, I will now turn things over to An and Hanif.
Thank you for that introduction. And for this evening, I was thinking back to the first time that I talked to Hanif, which was, I'm thinking now, right after Trump was elected. So it feels a little bit, serendipitous is too positive of a word, but it feels appropriate or something to be reunited again tonight and talking about similar themes as we talked about the first time, Black music, experimentation, and the role of Black experimentation, especially at cultural moments like the one that we are going through right now. So hopefully Hanif and I get to talk about some of those things. I will start by reading a section from Blackspace that has poems that I was writing in response to the work of Black video artists. So this chapter is called Black Screen. There are only two major distributors of video art in the United States. I visited both in March 2018 in search of works by Black video artists. Video art, an outcast in the family of the visual arts, isn't much talked about. Even less talked about are the contributions of artists of color to the field. In Chicago and New York, the homes of the Video Databank and Electronic Arts Intermix respectively, I spent hours glued to screens, watching work that stretched back to the early 70s and extended into present day. Black artists have used video art to make social critique for a long time. I was blown away by the commonalities in works by artists creating in vastly different places and eras. As a medium, video art often repurposes materials and themes from broadcast media, like television and radio, which for a long time were the primary forms of news communication in this country. Now perhaps eclipsed by internet-based forms like social media and YouTube, traditional broadcast media still provide a fairly reliable way to gauge what the most relevant issues of the day are. These poems, each a response to a work by a video artist of color, represents my wish to provide another platform for this hard-to-find work, and to play with what video, a time-based medium, shares with poetry: image, syntax, rhythm, and sound. But poetry and video art also investigate what it means to be a citizen at any particular time and show that the social problems that were relevant decades ago, far from being resolved, ring true even to contemporary ears. So the one I'll start with is in response to a work by a filmmaker, Kevin Jerome Everson, Cinnamon, and it's by a group of, it's about rather a community of Black drag racers in rural Virginia. And before watching this film, I had no idea that there were Black communities involved in drag racing, and it was the perfect way to find out. It's such a beautiful film, and I highly recommend anyone watch it if you can. Kevin Jerome Everson, Cinnamon, 2006, 1 hour, 10 minutes. Moves a woman in a field, her back to man, working the car, who calls out to Aaron, moves slowly. What flavor you want, the alcohol. At a race, there are drag cars and normal cars. There are flowers, blueness of car, and man's shirt, the garage window, and also in the grass and trees. Air dynamics. Cooler air means cars run quicker. Aaron in blue, taking off. Another man, how he used to do his racing on the street from 1978 to 1982. You don't have to have the best car, luck of the draw, it's God's will, hands, feet inside the car, about to race once she starts, sound, fade, she's exiting, gives a piece to John outside, a story about after his delay box broke, after Larry beat him, respected him, John is trying to fix the car as Aaron watches. She says, won't make it. John says, no, says, it was stupid at first, but ultimately thrilling. 23 minutes, 10 seconds. The car picks up and drives. It isn't dead. The rurality of the surround. Ashley with cornrows says, I love you. No talking. In drag. When she was 7, her dad got her a car. Feels lucky. She has 20 trophies in her room. She's sitting on the bed, black and white and silent, getting settled inside John. And his influence is John, Ashley's father. Aaron in a parked car zoning out. Aaron works at a bank and John is a mechanic, and at work Aaron has her dreads pulled into a bun, whereas on the track, in a lot, in some kind of forest clearing, her hair is down, the saturation is different, a black people in bleachers, a young boy prepares to race, a family unloads groceries from car into house with American flag. That's what drag racing is, its consistency, the same shot, 4 to 5 young white boys by the fence as Aaron is about to begin. We are inside a car looking out the windshield, and the closest we get I last night the filmmaker Ephraim Asili, who might be here right now, uh, had a showing of a series of films of his called the Diaspora Suite, which I got to watch when I was at the Video Data Bank. So I'll share some poems in response to Effie's work. Ephraim Asili, Points on a Space Age, 2007, 32 minutes, 42 seconds. We should go to the moon. Astronauts in outer, interspersed images of colorful garb, black and white in time, interspersed sense of the evolution of their costumes have remained the same. You are welcome to be citizens of the omniverse, and music has the good and ugly in it. This would seem to distinguish pop from jazz or African American classical, recalls some other horizons, the imagination, the traditional. Ignorance itself isn't strange at all. Ephraim Asili, Forged Ways, 2010, 15 minutes, 52 seconds. The sound from some other kind of space or craft and foot, set in a downtown US, shots into windows where flowers and mannequins with shots of impoverished walking downtown moves between that and a Caribbean nation, ducks, pigeons. I'm almost certain the flag is in the clip you took, as we see from the vehicle, the roadway and house and building alongside it. And the castle brings me to think about colonialism and the environments in which ways of life are forged, the sound of moving through it, the sound of photos taken, finally arrives home where his white girlfriend takes photos, 2 of them lounge. She puts up cutouts, religious sits, worship in the other nation, and constant roadways and cars. Behind, a chant in another language, the other location. Is this Ethiopia? And you were right about Harlem. So I'll move now into an essay. Earlier in this essay, I talked to Nathaniel Mackey about Amiri Baraka's statement, new black music is this, find the self, then kill it. So at this point in the essay, I've just sort of gotten through talking with Nathaniel Mackey about what it means to him to both find the black self and then to kill it. And now I'm moving sort of more into a general history. In The Death of Rhythm and Blues, Nelson George writes about the question of assimilation versus self-sufficiency as the primary strategy for empowerment for American blacks. For George, both are necessary, but only assimilation, the strategy that dilutes the racial power block in exchange for an American identity of dubious rewards, has dominated the thinking of most Black Americans. If this is true, it's worth asking why, just as it's worth asking whether things have changed since George made this assessment in 1988, 16 years before the advent of Facebook. New technologies, like social media, purport to help us better apprehend and navigate our environments, expand the range and depth of both our sensory and social experiences, exert force, execute tasks. Every technological change begins with a spiritual revelation, said Nate. It seems to me that one of the questions that you're asking is, what are the spiritual revelations brought about by the technologies that we're dealing with? On the one hand, social media affords everyone a sympathetic audience. For many disenfranchised people, this may be an entirely novel experience, allowing new kinds of communications, admissions, confessions, and catharses for those who have been societally silenced. These novel utterances increase the possibility for communication within communities in the way that encoded lyrics and songs have served as a means for Black people to safely communicate with each other in hostile surroundings. What these communications on their own can't prevent, however, is the way they are decoded and categorized by other agents in these hostile surroundings. The music industry's categorization of Black music as race music, for instance, derisively emphasized the differences between Black and white musicians' work. The term was replaced by an alternate classification, rhythm and blues, between 1948 and 1949 by major labels such as Billboard, after independent labels had already begun to make the switch. By the time that large music industry players revisited their language, however, the idea of segregating the music of Black performers had already become well ingrained within the American psyche, writes Lawrence Redd in Rock, It's Still Rhythm and Blues. The matter of whether historic segregation of Black and white cultural production is a result of, or whether it's led to, continuing xenophobia is a frustrating chicken or the egg question. As the musician Mel DeVisa said to me over Skype in the winter of 2014, we are socialized and brought up in ways that reinforce that our own way of life is the right way and we should be afraid of anything else. She was in Amherst, and I was in Iceland. She continued, we should fear being alone. We should fear God. Those ideas tie into why it's easier for us to reject people that don't look like us. I think of the fear of losing control to someone and why that is, in particular, a fear that some people of color, women, and people with disabilities harbor sometimes for life. I think of the restriction one feels when they are given options to reach and expand out of their comfort zone, and the crippling fear that they will be rejected or confused or embarrassed so they don't budge. The fear of the unknown can be a big part of life and can either propel you forward or absolutely tie you down. When music is involved, the idea of not knowing is incredible. Music is a vessel in which we reconstruct ourselves and are able to see ourselves as something more than afraid, more than a human in danger of losing control. I read just a bit from the last chapter, which is called Blackspace. Blackspace. When I'd finished writing an early version of Blackspace, a friend asked me if I had come closer to freedom. I said no, but I understood better what I needed to do to get there. I'd said this much earlier on in my gender transition. Over the course of this book, I've gone from living as a woman to living as a man. I've had to learn new social norms. As a trans man, I ask myself when to be silent and when to educate. Once, on a subway platform, a guy nearby said to me, "Hey man, did you see that?" A voluptuous woman had just walked by. Should I tell this guy how much it sucks to be ogled as a woman? I'd been initiated into a club I wasn't sure I wanted to be a part of. I now had the privilege to be silent, complicit. The freedom afforded to me by transition is not that I went from one identity to another, but that I went from a singular identity to the slow, meticulous destruction of identity, an endlessly morphing, changing, unreliable process. Identity is capricious. The first half year of transition, when I was painfully attached to my fledgling self-concept, I thought obsessively about my identity, how well and effectively it could be crushed. Around the same time, my relationship with my family crumbled to the ground. I saw myself navigate conflict in ways that announced to me I would never be the same person again. Not only would I never be who I was before, but I would never occupy an identity in quite the same way. I survived my own annihilation. I was not the idea I put my credence into. I was somewhere else. To move toward freedom is subtractive. Less do I resonate with a piecemeal version of my self-concept made up of what I like, what I don't like, my political ideas, and the historical memory of my people, all monsters on the other side of a window. They look real. I can see them. They are frightening. They appear to be close. They can never touch me. The antidote to chronic loneliness isn't to seek people, it's to dig into what it means to be alone. My thoughts about the world around me are projections, each and every one. My thoughts about myself are projections onto what is ultimate reality, which has no words attached to it. Realization in itself produces a great aloneness in me. Judgment of the world around me is a way of forcing a relation where I feel the threat of the disappearance of my identity. The mind senses how tenuous identity is. If I don't keep working at it, it starts to fall apart. I don't control which pieces fall off either. I don't even know when they fall. I may just see myself differently. Why is the mind afraid to disappear, but when it disappears, there's no sign of it? Why is there fear around a process that produces serenity? I ask questions without waiting for an answer. Eventually, the questions themselves don't arise. For the past couple years, many memories from childhood and adolescence have returned. They are painful, other times benign, like the memory of a street I used to walk down, or a bowling alley, an old apartment, a person I once talked to. The person I am today arises out of moments I can remember and moments I can't. It's unclear if recovering memories makes me act differently or if I'm recovering them at instances of transformation when I become able to accommodate the new information. The mind is a web. I see visual resonances, hear sonic resonances, feel how I felt before and at the same time feel about how I felt. I don't need to know. After years of bullying by my peers and abuse from my family, I got it in my head that the best way to avoid future abuse was to know all I could know about the present situation, myself, others, but most importantly, about the world in general. I studied sociology and anthropology in college, plagued by the sense of not grasping social interaction. Mind you, it doesn't make you any less socially awkward to read Irving Goffman. I resemble today from the outside the mostly well-adjusted people I loathed as a misanthropic teenager. The reasons for writing a book: a desire to disseminate information, the desire to speak, a call to lyric, a cinematic urge. Human minds are conditioned along many of the same wave patterns. What's inside me is much like what's inside you, what you want, where you're going. These are the qualities of a hive mind. In writing, individual qualities become less important. Even how the individual embodies the collective, a kind of individuality, isn't important. I'm prone to overvalue the extent to which I'm a unique person despite any, and there's copious evidence to the contrary. Who I am feels every day a little less important. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you for that. I loved hearing you read, and I'm so glad. I was, well, I guess I'll save this for after. I'm going to read a few things, but not for long because I want to ask questions about this book that I loved. But this is, I'm going to read 3 poems, maybe 4 if they're short, from a series I started working on last year, not knowing that it would be so immediately in the discussion currently, but also imagining that it would always be in the discussion. And since An read about film, I'm going to read the first two poems I'm going to read. They're all the same title. First I'm going to read are, one is about a scene from the film New Jack City, and one is from about a scene from a TV show, The Wire. Yeah. The title of these poems are All the TV Shows Are About Cops. All the TV shows are about cops. You are supposed to want Nino Brown dead after the wedding. In the brief moment, when he swings the flower girl over his face while the bullets from his enemies make a procession of dust along the chapel steps, when he sets the girl down in front of her dying father, bleeding from a solar system of dark wounds, you might, for a moment, wish for the undercover cop to pull the trigger. But I have loved the dealer who prayed to unzip themselves into a child when drowning in a sea of shouts and sirens. I have loved those who wore soft red bruises left by handcuffs like an ancestor's riches. When Nino flings the doors of the van open on Thanksgiving and the hood flocks to get turkeys, the idea is not about goodness. He who feeds the streets must feed the streets. I most want the undercovers dead when I peep how easy it is for them to slither between worlds, to vanish from the comforts of the state and reappear in an underworld of silk and white powder. The hood cheered when the plainclothes cop threw Nino from the penthouse balcony and into the pile of trash bags, his bloodied mouth whimpering through the metaphor. Consider the moment of the cop, mask off, whispering, I want to shoot you so bad, my dick is hard, with a gun shaking inches from the dealer's face. It seems then that desire is the axis, the child trembling inside all of us, screaming at whatever we've become. This poem's about a scene in The Wire where Carver jumps on a car. You can find it on YouTube if you're that interested. All the TV shows are about cops. You can always tell which police officer is supposed to be the cool one by the way the cigarette dangles between their cracked fingers, or by the way the cigarette smoke dances along a diamond ring, or by the platinum chain their badge swings from, by the whip they push through the back alleys they grew up on. You can tell the cool cop by how they know the older brothers of the dope boys and don't drop government names when yelling out of a tinted window, how they keep the elbow angled just right when shooting ball, the way coaches who circled the hood taught them on a court lined with needles and broken glass. You can tell the cool cop by the way they eyeball the stash, don't even need to keep a scale, say fuck the interrogation, there is no truth that doesn't reflect itself in blood, can tell by the song that plays when they put the siren on top of the Benz, something you maybe heard sliding around along the leather back seat of an OG's ride, know the exact way to order a sandwich at the corner spot and who to ask for the dirt. It is so seductive to blur the line between beloved and executioner, not afraid to take the dirty money long as street niggas don't forget who ain't doing a bid behind a stray bullet. I admit, back in the day, I loved the moment Carver leapt atop the Nissan Sentra in his black kicks and his baggy jeans, and he offered a sermon of threats to the boys hiding somewhere in the concrete forest, the way his mouth undressed the slang and its familiar comforts when he yelled, "You do not get to win, we do." I'll read one more because I want to leave room for audience questions. And I also just, I don't know, don't want to take up too much space. I say as my desk is like flooded with poems. All the TV shows are about cops. I miss ritual more than I miss religion. It is good to have somewhere to be and a song that carries you there, to drift into a dream while bent, face pressed to the ground. The carpet in my grandfather's house smelled like the cigarettes he told my mother he'd long sworn off. Pray, not to God, but to the lies your people tell each other to survive. If there is a heaven, let it be a heaven not of people, but a heaven of those lies, breathing beyond the people who told them across the table or gently blew them into an ear, a heaven of cigarette butts in the shape of a heavy white beard, or a heaven of cash and cars and gold rings. If my myths outlive me, I carve out a corner of heaven for the lies I've told with a flashlight in my eyes or beaming into my car. I carve out a corner for the way I treated the black judge like kin while he scanned my record and considered a sentence. More than I miss religion, I miss how easy it is to be forgiven when the altar beckons 5 times a day. A corner of heaven for the Arabic I've tripped over on a path to forgiveness. A corner for the imagined girlfriends turning over in my brain during the silent prayers, the moans pushed into a worn down prayer rug. Even my pleas are lies. Even when I know what I've done, I can't bring myself to speak its name. No one thinks God would wear a badge or spend a Sunday cleaning weapons while people fainted into the aisles of a church in the name of something holy. I don't believe in God as much as I believe in an interrogation room. I believe in someone placing a loaded gun on a metal table between me and a door, and who gets to be God then? Would God be the bullet or the table or the door? But maybe I'm getting too caught up in the romantics of power again. All the police officers from my hood went to church in the mornings and helped old women up the stairs and into their pews before receiving the word. Cleanliness is a soft palm which turns a face towards its righteous path, and so keeping the streets clean is an act of God. No one thinks God would push a face into the mud while saying you want to die today, so low the onlookers can't hear. Maybe we're all playing dress up and paying our tithes where we can. Maybe there is no devil and just 100 different ways to be the wrong kind of God. Maybe if the candles light the concrete's blood, someone might mistake these memorials for a type of prayer. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I love that.
So this is exciting for me because in preparation for this, not just spending time again with the book, I spent time with our interview from 2016, and so much of it was about optimism, or like what to do with, not that I think either of us were feeling optimistic, but like what does one do? Because you're right, it was like, at the interview was like 2 weeks after the election.
Yeah.
And I'm a cynic by nature, and so I was kind of just like, well, you know, what it is. But I'm lately feeling renewed in my optimism. And I think it's becoming, as I like further divest from the American political experiment, I'm finding elsewhere. And I was kind of on that path when we talked 4 years ago, but now I feel like I've arrived there in a better way. And I'm wondering a very broad question to kind of like flip the mirror back to you now that I'm the one doing the interviewing. Where and how have you found optimism, if you found it at all, in this current arc of our lives?
Yeah. So I have this mantra this year, and when I say it, everyone's like, "You're insane," but I'm like, "It's the year of unity," and it's like ostensibly it's not, right, and we're this word polarized keeps getting used by people, like we're increasingly polarized, we're increasingly isolated, we have our pods and things like that, but there's also this way that I think at least I've had to fight to maintain my relationships during this time in a way that I think has only strengthened them. And so I've felt this kind of falling away of the fake relationships, or the kind of uh, appearances, or things like that I was keeping up. Like, I have so few fucks to give about kind of what things that don't feel real. And so there's this way that just in my own artistic practice and writing practice and social practice, and I mean that in terms of like the relationships that I keep with people, that I feel more unified as a person. I feel like my community has come together more strongly, and that makes me optimistic. And there's also, you know, as someone who works a lot or thinks a lot about Black futurity, but tries to do that kind of broadly, you know, not just within the realm of necessarily science fiction or something like that. But people keep telling me about what's this show? Something Country. Do you know?
Lovecraft Country.
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
And I was watching the trailer, and I've yet to. My friend gave me her HBO login, so I gotta do it. But I was just watching the trailer, and I was like, this is like that exercise that you're supposed to do when you like go back and heal your child self, and you like imagine it, and you like imagine it going right, or like what you would say or something like that. Like, that's what that felt like to me. So that made me feel optimistic too.
I was excited to talk about a couple things from the book, and I'm happy you mentioned Kevin Jerome Everson, who is an Ohioan. And so I have a lot of affection for his work, particularly the film Eerie. and I have a lot of affection for his work because I think he so gently treats the history of Black migration. He treats it so gently in his work. And I think also like treats migration, I'm from the Midwest, and I feel like people think migration kind of ended at Chicago, but you know, in Ohio, that's how like funk music was invented.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering if I think the question I'm really getting at is that increasingly people I know and love do not feel safe in the places they live in the United States. Or they feel like where they live is perhaps untenable for them. You know, Ohio being one of those places, as much as I love my home state, home city. And I'm wondering what you think the future of Black migration could look like if there is.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Yeah, because I'm in New York right now. I'm in Brooklyn, and I've been here for the whole pandemic, and I think that even though in like March, April, May, when everyone was kind of fleeing the city, it always felt to me like the place to be, and it's something about the way that New York bands together, and in times like this, that have just made this like where I want to ride this out. But I also split my time between here and Iowa, and that's and not just that, but like run this residency program where we like invite Black artists to go to Iowa and like make work there, you know. And so I wouldn't do that if I didn't believe in that as a project, you know. And learning about Black culture in the Midwest was like a big culture shock for me, because I like, you know, like I was born in Haiti, but like mostly grew up in like Boston and New York, and like went to school in Vermont. Like that was my kind of, the East Coast was like my point of reference. But so I think that like the Midwest, like Blackness in the Midwest, we're gonna see people from the coasts, I think, go inward for lots of reasons. And I think that the sort of like the reference to the Midwest, the middle of the country, is like flyover, or like this kind of dismissive way that people talk about the middle of the country on the coast is, I think that's going to turn. Like I think that the middle of the country is going to start to be where it's at, because it's just the coast are a little there. It's not. It doesn't feel totally sustainable. Like there's something about the kind of high pitch New York that feels like. I mean, people are leaving. Like rents at an all-time low. Like you know, like people are fleeing. But that's what I see happening, is like the Midwest having kind of a surge of people.
Right. The Black, so there's a part of the book, I believe maybe in the beginning, the first essay or the second, where the Black avant-garde is mentioned, and it talks about, this is when I first read the book, this is the thing that like blew my mind. It had me set it down and think about it for a while. The thing about Rosa Parks.
Yeah.
How like Rosa Parks is avant-garde because of, or the idea of like protest placing the body in front of harm is avant-garde. And so I was wondering then what to, I'm still piecing this together, because as someone who has for much of my life has been involved with protest in a very on the ground way, I have found myself getting more and more cynical about protest photography. Though I don't think that's any fault of the photography. I think this is my own internal mess that I need to work through. But I was wondering how you felt about the archival of these protest moments. Most notably, the line for me is there's that infamous photo of the woman who is kind of being rushed by police while she has her hands out. That photo, I'll send it to you someday.
Okay.
But how do you feel about this kind of like archival of protest art that is showing Black people putting their bodies in between others in harm? Does that still continue in that lineage of avant-garde, or is it is the consumption of that type of art kind of maybe has maybe hit a fever pitch with the white gaze?
I think it's hit a fever pitch for sure, and in that moment that you're talking about, I'm talking about, that's Adam Pendleton is thinking about Rosa Parks putting her body on the line, and in that same essay, I'm also thinking about Tony Coates,
Right.
who also made a piece about Rosa Parks, but didn't use any images, and that was a very purposeful way of preserving what he felt was potent about the bus boycott, and that to bring it into image would be to kind of lose its power, right? Um, and so there's this way that I think that protest photography is like on brand, like,
Mm.
and anytime something's on brand, it's not where we're going, it's where we are already. uh, that being said, I think images are important,
Right. Yeah.
like, I don't how did you feel about the blackout day on social media?
Uh,
Haha.
I have to say it wasn't. I largely ignored it because it wasn't. I couldn't figure out any way in which it was for me. Right.
Yeah,
Like the action that was being asked wasn't for me to take, and the witnessing of the action didn't really feel like it was for me either.
yeah,
Like I had a hard time figuring out actually who it was for,
right,
and then it felt like there was this like. I just think guilt can never be the vehicle, right? Like, and so often
100%.
guilt is the vehicle, and I think when guilt is a vehicle, it really inhibits. And I'm not just talking about like white guilt. I'm also talking about like
Yeah,
for me, like being straight cisgender male. Like guilt cannot be the vehicle for
yeah,
any action because then you're not like seeing a person's needs,
yeah,
right? You're seeing absolution. You're like seeing the end before you see the everything in the
yeah,
middle, right?
yeah,
So it felt like the blackout day was some of that, where it's like, how do I get to the end of this absolution while like stepping entirely over everyone
whoa, yeah,
who was like asking the question of or expressing needs? And and I say that knowing that people like had good intentions in mind and it seemed to be
right,
like well-meaning, but I do think that like it was driven by guilt in a way that
yeah,
obscures perhaps
yeah,
some emotional connection that's needed to do liberation work.
yeah. And a criticism of it was that it was making things hard for people who were organizing on social media.
Mm-hmm.
So the way that it I found that really interesting, like that the pragmatism, it started to like get in the way, like the symbolic gesture of it got in the way of the sort of pragmatic organizing work that was happening,
Yeah,
in a way that it couldn't.
yeah,
I couldn't find the way that was productive or like needed. Yeah,
yeah. The absence of image, right, took up so much space
yeah,
that um, I mean, social media and algorithms and whatnot are things I don't understand very well, but I do
for sure.
remember kind of being like, well, how fascinating that this absence of image uh, is the loudest thing that many of us are seeing. That in the midst of like really practical uses for that platform during a literal uprising, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, it was very odd. Um, I'm gonna ask one more thing and then
for sure.
open up the audience questions. And this is, I was so happy that you read the thing about race music
Mm,
and the classification of
mm,
Black music throughout American history, because that's something I think about literally all the time. And I think about Little Richard all the time. And I think about Sister Rosetta
mm,
Tharpe all the time. And I think
mm.
about Ma Rainey, et cetera, like the
Yeah,
originators, right?
yeah,
Who had to live like a lot of their lives shouting at the establishment that they were the originators.
yeah,
And it is because of those classifications that continue to um, music is the lens through which I'm going to ask this question, but I think it extends outward. But how does one, um, you talk about Afrofuturism being like permission to dream oneself into a future, right?
yeah.
How does one dream themselves into a future that is attempting to reclassify them or erase them or um, make their
Yeah.
make their accomplishments or achievements or lineage uh, not a worthwhile thing to be written into the history books?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's so hard. I really wish I had like what felt like a satisfactory answer, but the thing that the thing that's coming to mind is um, that it matters where we start. Like, and the answer's coming to me in terms of visual art. I don't know why, but thinking about specifically cultural criticism, and this is why like I'm happy to be in conversation with you because you have this whole music cultural criticism, like that's a huge part of your contribution to the culture. Like, and so, and I think it's a different way of thinking than poetry, but obviously they overlap. But I guess I think that there's this way that work that could be avant-garde, or I think is avant-garde, or is going to this future place, gets encoded as being sort of uh, oppositional or protest or subversive in a way that is already cliche. And so, because like white cultural spaces have become very comfortable with the idea of Black people making art about being oppressed. And so if a Black person makes work like that, it can be lauded in a white cultural space that otherwise has no commitment to changing anything that it's doing, and it kind of gets the cultural capital of saying we've got this cool kind of like subversive art, you know. And so there's this way that I think that question that you're asking is maybe more about what cultural critics can do to stop reducing the way that we access culture that has possibilities in it that are getting like missed because we're just kind of reading them in these familiar ways. Um, yeah, that's what I would say. I can't think of a way that like a maker would figure that out because
Right.
like they're ultimately at the whims of like everyone else who runs the cultural apparatus, like galleries and the music industry and things like this. Um, yeah, I don't know if that answers your
No,
question.
that was a
But
good answer.
yeah.
And I and even while asking it, I was like, I think this is maybe a tough and unanswerable question.
Yeah. I'm gonna keep thinking about it, and I'm gonna be like, I'll email you.
Yeah, yeah. There's the one when I was prepping for this where I had like a run of questions. I was like, I want to ask that one, but I also know that there's no, like, even in my own brain, there's no satisfactory response.
For sure, yeah.
All right. If you are in the audience, you can type. We have like 9 minutes left.
9 minutes.
Get your questions in. There is one that I'm going to ask, well, from an audience member.
Okay.
Could you talk a little bit about how this book came together? Did it begin with conversations with the artists experiencing their work or your own writing?
That is a great question. With it began with my publisher believing in me to write this book, even before it existed. Um, and at the time, I was about to start a residency where I was planning to talk to Black artists. And so I was collecting interviews. And even before I started the book, I had been writing about Black music and doing some freelance music. So it started mainly with interviews. And I'm a poet, so essays are not where I felt comfortable at the time. And so it took a lot longer for the essays to come to be. Um, so the order was sort of like interviews, poetry, essays last.
Um, in lieu of another person putting a question in, I'm going to ask another question of my own because I was very interested in the interview inclusion, and not only the interview inclusion, but I thought you did such a good job of just like embodying the people you were speaking, you know, like bringing them into the space. So it wasn't just like, I talked to this person, now there's this.
Yeah.
It just felt so, um, for me, because you and I like orbit the same world of writers, you know, it
Yeah.
felt in a way like seeing just a gallery of the homies where it's like, oh, there's
That's
Justin.
right.
And it's like,
Yeah.
of course Justin would say that, you know, that kind of thing. And I really wanted to ask about the intentions in that to kind of have um, an archival space where you're not just doing these interviews, but also bringing people into the room. Um, was that intentional? What kind of went into that kind of intentional thinking?
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. Because it took some doing to get the interviews away from like transcript, you know,
Right.
and to feeling like actual interactions that I was having with these people. And it's a range of people. Like actress I talked to, you know, we had like 2 interviews that were like a year apart, and so I was blending that information and trying to make it feel like relatively seamless. And then Justin's the homie, like we probably just chillin', and then other people are more like um, formal like interviewing Nate Mackey. I had like my notes, I had like my recorder, you know, and I was like, all right, you know, that was the most. I barely said anything during that. Um, but so it took some. I was trying to decide even if I wanted to include people's last names because I didn't want it to be like, here's this person, this is what they do, and this is the context of their work, and this is why I'm talking about them, but more so to embody like how I came to talk to them, which was, here's this person I admire, or who's the homie, and I'm like, hey, do you want to talk about your work? And it's very personal for me. Like oftentimes I'm talking to people because there's something I want to learn from them, or they're doing something and I just want to get inside their head. So I wanted it to feel a little bit uh, more personal, more intimate like that, you know, as opposed to kind of uh, a journalistic, sort of like traditional journalistic approach.
Yeah. Um, would you mind? This is a question from
Yeah, yeah,
an
yeah.
audience
Thanks
member.
for moderating, by the way.
Would you mind discussing the ekphrastic writing you produced here? Was responding to the work of another challenging? That's a good question.
Sure, sure, sure. I'm teaching a class right now called Ekphrasis is a Kind of Love, about what it actually what actually happens when you respond to someone's work, and how it's very much like responding to a human being. And so similarly to how I wanted the interviews to feel personal, the ekphrastic works came from, I would be just for example, like the poems about Ephraim's work, because I saw that he's here. I would be watching the work and then like scribbling notes furiously as I was watching, and noting down like both just literally what I was seeing, but then also like a thought would pop into my head and I would write that down too. Um, and then later, like months later, I looked at these notes and kind of tried to reconstruct, like from my memory and the photos that I illegally took of the work, like what had been happening in the space. So it's kind of like an answer and non-answer. I wanted there to be some of the feeling of the watching, some of the kind of, so you could sense some of the cuts and some of the timing, and see some of the images clearly or hear some of the dialogue. But also I wanted you to be with me as I was watching it too, and what was coming up for me. So trying to conjure an in-between space.
I'll ask the last question,
Yeah.
and it is something I've been asking. Uh, I've always had kind of shaky ideas around traditional modes of productivity and like what artists are, you know, particularly Black artists, but all artists, um, and this kind of capitalistic notion of like you are not until you create.
Yeah.
And so I've been asking a lot of my writer friends lately, um, how have you been good? How have you been being good to yourself on the days where you don't feel up to writing, or the days you don't feel like it's
Ooh.
just like not hitting for you?
Yeah. My friend used this really great word, proto writing. I was like, that one. Like the I there are days when I write words down, but it doesn't really feel like writing, you know, like I don't quite get to the point where it feels like writing. And proto writing feels like the great word for what happens those days when I kind of miss the mark, and it giving it a word I think allows it to still feel important or like something that I'm
Yeah.
doing. Um, so I think that's it. But I've actually become one of these people who like schedules writing time, which I was very against before. But now I find that like if I don't schedule it out, I'm not going to do it because I'm going to wait for some feeling that's not going to come, you know.
You schedule every day?
Not every day, no, like 3 times a week. There's like a time, like my phone is like writing time, you know, and then I'll like sit down and do the damn thing.
That's wild. Oh, really quick, another person asked a question that they're curious about what's on the syllabus for the ekphrasis is a type of
Ekphrasis kind of live.
yeah.
Um, uh, wow. Simone White, Dear
Ooh,
Angel of Death,
yeah,
great book.
incredible.
Uh, Dion Brand, The Blue Clerk. This book, Moira of Edges, by Moina Pam Dick. Wow, gotta recall my syllabus. All right, right now. Put me on the spot. 7 Vocabularies by Tan Lin. 7 Controlled Vocabularies by Tan Lin. I'm looking at my bookshelf. There's one more I'm not remembering. Hit me up later. Oh, The Service Porch by Fred
I
Moten.
love the Service Porch.
Oh, we love Fred Moten.
Love Fred. I think that is it.
That's it. That's a wrap.
Thank you so everyone who came through. Thank you so much for spending Friday night here. And
yeah,
I've said it in many ways, but I love the book. It's been such an honor to spend some time with the book and spend some time hearing from you and talking to you.
It was really great to see you, and I hope you're faring all right over there.
Trying.
Great. Well, thank you both for joining us, and thank you, Hanif, for moderating the Q&A. I just want to take another moment to thank our wonderful speakers and all of you for spending your evening with us and showing up for authors, publishers, indie book selling, and our incredible staff here at Harvard Bookstore. We sincerely appreciate your support now and always. Please make sure to check out Blackspace in the link below. I posted a couple times and it should be on our website front and center. And thanks again for your time and your support and for spending part of your evening with us. Have a great night, everyone, and stay well.
Thank you. Bye.
Good night, everyone.